Copays, if the PBM is willing to forgive copays, why not raise your copays to $1,000? Now, I know that's not a very popular thing to say, but seriously, if pharma is going to kick in money, why not raise your copay to meet the fact that pharma is kicking in money? So pharma money is available for copay forgiveness programs called by the industry patient assistance programs. So you may want to, if you do have members that don't qualify or can't get copay assistance programs, you may want to cover them on an extra contractual basis in the unlikely scenario that copays aren't forgiven. So again, I saw a claim go through for one of my clients, and the member had already exceeded their benefit. This was a couple years ago, but they've already exceeded their benefit, and it showed on the claims adjudication on my claims data that the member had paid a $5,000 copay. Well, that's just impossible. I mean, this member is a union communication worker. There's no way that they have $5,000. I don't have $5,000 sitting around to pay for, a copay for prescription drugs. So I wondered how that happened, and we later found out through the PBM that it was through a copay assistance program, but the data showed that the member had paid this. So again, you may want to go back to your PBM and make sure your data is correct. And, too good to be true. Welldyne has a program. Welldyne's one of those kind of mid-tier PBMs. And I'll just read you specifically. Unlike other industry programs, Welldyne's Intercept program is designed to capture the full coupon amount for the copay, even those coupon programs designed to change during the life of therapy. So again, Welldyne's willing to go out and not only get the copay forgiven, but also any other additional monies through the life of the therapy they're willing to pass back to their clients. And so, again, you might want to look at these types of programs where if you can raise the copay and you can get all the money from pharma to forgive the copay, then that is going to help you reduce some of the cost. Okay, prior authorizations. Again, something I could probably talk about for the next hour, and I won't, keep us on time. Prior authorizations were set up in the industry so that there was going to be a clinical conversation between the physician and the PBM. And this was to make sure that the patient was right for this drug, kind of like a second surgical opinion where the PBM would talk to the doctor about, have you tried and failed this? Does the patient meet certain clinical guidelines? Again, for the Hep C drugs, you need to be a certain genotype. Has the physician tested you for a genetic test to make sure you're the right genotype to take Harvoni or Sovaldi? Have they done this research? What was the results? What were the lab results? So it was supposed to be this clinical conversation. Well, it's not that. More than 99% of PAs are approved, and PBMs charge about $40 for those. And it's really just kind of a speed bump and there's really no clinical conversation around that. They are designed for, again, high-cost drugs like, specialty drugs like the Enbrel, the arthritis and plaque psoriasis, the Hep C growth hormone. So that's really what a prior authorization is. But they are broken. And in a recent audit, we found hundreds of PAs still in place. So this was a program that we had switched PBMs 10 years ago. So we'd switched from one PBM to the next PBM. We told the PBM, the new PBM, we wanted to grandfather these folks for a year so that when their PAs from the prior PBM are over, to re-up the prior authorization. In other words, have another clinical conversation with a physician to talk about, are these drugs still justified? What we didn't want to do with this PBM switch was to make members have to go back to their doctors and get another prior authorization just because we'd switched PBMs. So we were trying to grandfather them in for a year. Unbeknownst to us, the PBM set the prior authorizations to 2035, the year 2035. So, which is like Never Never Land. So we found hundreds of PAs that we thought were just grandfathered for a year were actually in place for forever. So these patients would never have to go back and get these drugs justified with their physician. Some of these were narcotics. We had people on pain meds for 10 years that had been grandfathered without any type of review or protocol for them. So again, as a fraud person, I was really, shocked to see that. Over 70% of the PAs were undocumented. It just was like we went into their computer system and it just said approved. There was no, talk to Dr. Jones, he did all the testing, here are the lab results attached, and everything's fine. They were just totally undocumented. And when they were documented, we saw non-clinical personnel that supplied diagnosis and prognosis information. So talk to Sally, the receptionist at Dr. Jones' office, and Susan has plaque psoriasis, and she's doing really well with Enbrel, and go away, Mr. PBM, thank you very much. So that's what we saw in their notes. I mean, not the thank you very much, but you get what I'm trying to say. And there is really scientific basis for what I'm saying. I'm not just up here bashing PBMs. There is really scientific evidence. There's a wonderful article that I've referenced here from as far back as 2001 that says the industry cannot be critical of our own sacred cows, meaning that we develop these programs, and now it's really hard for us to say these programs suck, but they do. And that's what the scientific article, and I just love this little cartoon, meet our new head of security. It is the fox watching the hen house. So you may want to consider carving out the prior authorization process, and there are some excellent academic institutions that are now offering prior authorization services for you outside the PBM relationship because they realize that there is this fox watching the hen house relationship. They also offer medication therapy management programs, and they also offer formulary development programs if you don't want to go along with your PBM's formulary. I'm very supportive of academic research and these types of programs. RX Results is, and I'm not paid by anybody, so don't be throwing that up here, but University of Arkansas and UMass School of Pharmacy both have programs where they sell to commercial plans. So if you're interested in those, I've given you the websites here, or just Google those programs. I'm sure you'll find them. So consider separation of your prior authorization program. So believe it or not, I am right on time. Whew, got through that quickly. But some conclusions here. Whether unmanaged or managed by the PBMs, plan costs are going to increase, and that's mainly due to these huge amounts of increases you're going to see with specialty drugs. Hopefully I've given you a couple of things to check off your list and go back and look at. And you really need to take an aggressive approach, not only with specialty drugs, but also, brand and generics on the market, and make sure that you are really thoughtfully evaluating your pharmacy benefit program. And I have this last quote here I thought was really kind of pithy and to the point. In modern healthcare, it is unethical not to be concerned with evaluation and no longer acceptable to be evaluation illiterate. And I think what that means in perspective of this presentation is that you really do need to go back every year and evaluate what programs are working in the prescription drug arena, what programs are not working, and not be afraid of throwing away maybe something that wasn't working or something that you've been doing for a while and start something new and innovative. Because if you're not new and innovative in this arena, you're just going to be swallowed up by higher and higher costs that I just don't see American companies able to sustain. So you really do need to look at this and be creative and be willing to kind of throw out the old and start the new and evaluate every year what's working and what isn't. So with that, should I take questions, Justin? Okay. I've absolutely stunned you and depressed you. That's an excellent, yes. Yeah, so as the chemical compound is discovered, it has its generic or what's called a scientific name, and until it's released onto the market or the FDA approves it, typically the manufacturer doesn't name it until it goes onto the market. So that's why the generic name is on there. It's not available generically. I do not want to mislead you in that way. It's not available. These drugs will not be available generically. And in fact, many of these are biotech drugs, and we could get into a whole presentation about biotech and biosimilars, and the whole European, Europe has about 20 biosimilars available. We only have one in this country to date. Really hasn't done much to the cost, but I'm telling you, they're not available. These will not be available generically. It's just the generic chemical name. Okay. Yes. Well, I think. So I have one client who's really embraced this idea. They're in New York City, where again heroin overdoses are epidemic. Although again, I would also say that my own county that I live in Illinois, Lake County, has had I'll get into that in a second. But anyway, so we came to the 2 per year just randomly. So it comes in a 2-pack, and it's one package with a 2-pack. We said, well, that's kind of enough. If you're living with someone that has 2 overdoses within a year, that you should probably get that person into a program or something. Again, I think this client kind of wanted to see, so they just approved it for one 2-pack a year, and that was their thinking. Yeah, so the question is about Narcan, and again, you're right. If the patient isn't responsive, that's why it's in the 2-pack. So there's 2 doses. If the patient doesn't respond to the first dose, you can, a few minutes later, administer the second dose. Sometimes they do respond within the first dose, so you can use the second dose later. The thinking of this client was, if you have one, they kind of gave you and pardon this is exactly what the benefit administrator said, you kind of get a get-out-of-jail-free card once. And then if you're continuing to have this problem, overdosing on heroin, you need to get into a program, or your loved one that you're living with needs to get into a program. So that was their thinking, but they definitely wanted to take a wait-and-see approach. If they got more appeals for more of them, they were willing to expand this, because they said that it's, even if we don't cover the member that is overdosing, so let's say it's a aunt that you're living with that's opioid dependent, you're not going to cover the aunt. But they said, because this is going to be such a disruptive factor in the workplace, that if you are taking care of someone that's opioid addicted and they suffer an overdose, that's going to be really disruptive to the member that we cover, that we wanted to continue to cover it. So, because they were going to be out of work and they were going to be distracted from working, and so they're just kind of taking. They did this. They wanted to see how it's going to go, and they're going to reevaluate it. Just like I said, every program needs reevaluation. So.
How do they determine whether or not you have a member in your household that's addicted?
They just said if anyone wants it, they can have it for one package a year. There's no prior authorization. It's just based on the fact that they didn't want to put any more stigma associated with getting this than is already kind of in society. So they just said, you get 1 per year, and let's see how it goes. And if we get a lot of appeals, we'll maybe increase it. If we don't, and so you don't have to say, my son is addicted to heroin, or my aunt is addicted to heroin. You got it, and that was it. And they thought it was worth it's now available generically, so they thought it was worth it. I haven't. We put this in January, so we didn't even do it at the beginning of January. We did it in January when it became available generically. So we haven't really seen it yet. But again, and I think the more startling thing is what I was about to say when I mentioned Lake County, Illinois, is what we're seeing in Lake County, Illinois, what we're seeing in DuPage County, Illinois, is that heroin is now being laced with fentanyl. Fentanyl is 100% more potent than heroin. So with the lacing of heroin with fentanyl, and again, I never thought I'd be standing up here talking about heroin and fentanyl, but it has become a much more dangerous drug. And it's really cheap. I mean, heroin is like $16 a day. That's cheaper than a bottle of wine. I mean, unless you're on Boone's Farm or something, but show my age, anyway.